Guys, I want to welcome you to another session of the Advisory Board podcast, where we bring experts in the franchise industry in to coach you with actionable insights, the real deal, what's actually going on, not the fluff, no chest beating here. So to that point, I brought one of my favorite people in the industry in today again, Eric Van Horn. If you haven't met him yet, Eric's done a lot. Like, he's one of the best Fran Dev guys I know. He's also straight up and like just tells the truth, which is, a little it's not a rarity, but it's not as common as you'd like to think. He's partner at Front Street Capital. Isn't that what it's called, Eric?
Yep, Front Street Equity Partners. Yep.
Thank you, Front Street Equity Partners. They've got kind of an FSO component. They also run all sorts of mastermind groups. Eric, why don't you, before I botch this, tell us a little bit more about you, some of the things you've got going on, because that leads really well into why we're talking about our topic today.
Perfect. I'm excited to be here again, man. All right. So I run a couple mastermind groups, one for franchisees and one for franchisors. And that's all through Scalable Franchise. And then I have a company called Front Street Equity Partners. It's me and two other business partners. And what we do there is we have an FSO component to it. So we'll go into a emerging brand, and we will do all their outsourced development, like a lot of FSOs do. Mm-hmm. Then we also have a private equity component to it, where we will inject capital into brands as they need it, those brands that are part of our portfolio. And then there's a strategic advisory component to it as well, where we get deep in the trenches, boots on the ground, get our hands dirty, helping these brands go from a zero or a handful of franchisees to scaling where they want to go, where they can have a meaningful exit. And so by in the trenches advisory, Dave, we spend a lot of time on the FDD, helping them with the FDD, helping them put in the right people, like fractional CEO, CFO, CEO, C-level executives, because a lot of these emerging brands, they're not ready to have a very big payroll with incredible talent. So we want them to have amazing talent, but without paying the price for it full time. So there's a lot that, those are some of the things that have going on. I also got the podcast Franchise Secrets that you've been on.
Yeah. It's great, but and it does other things that you contribute a lot of content all over the place. It feels like every time I turn around, I see you, but good stuff.
And I'm trying to level up on content too. Like, I was talking to, have you heard of Alex Hormozi?
I don't know Alex.
Alex, check out Alex Hormozi. He's amazing. And he was having a conversation with Grant Cardone a number of years ago. And he paid Grant to be a mentor. And Alex is just like, how come you have so much more reach than I do? And Alex is an incredibly successful guy. And Grant's like, well, let's look at our social. And they looked at their social media, and he's like, you are not posting very much. You're not doing very much. And Grant's a big 10X guy. And so he said, you need to 10X what you're doing now. And I believe Alex is spending $70,000 a month on social media to have that reach. So I do a lot on social, but when I look at people like him, like, it's never enough. And if you really want to have massive impact, you just need to do more. So I try my best, man. I try my best.
Yeah, well, you're a good example, I think, because if you the reality is what we're going to talk about today, we're going to kind of live by what we preach, but it's about providing value and actionable content. Like, I get a little tired, fatigued from the chest beating, and everyone's at conferences and having fun, and that's good. Like, it's fun to have kind of the engaging social type side of things, but I love the content where somebody's dropping truth bombs or sharing like a compact lesson that they learned. And that stuff's really valuable. So let's do that today. And guys, what we're going to talk about, the reason I wanted Eric on for this session is we're going to be talking about a couple of things, challenges that emerging and growing brands are facing, specifically in trying to grow the franchise system. So we're going to be talking about, to use an FSO or not, doing it in-house or not. How do you do it right? How do you grow fast and responsibly? Like, there's all these like balance points that we've got to kind of keep in check, or else we've all known the people that are rocket ships and then go bankrupt or have to sell out at a fraction of what they should have because somebody else has to come in and clean up the mess, or they go from 10 to 50 units to 25 units, right? Like, these are awful things in the history of a franchise, because then your item 19's wrecked. So you usually can't share it. And then that, casts a little bit of shade on you as a brand and makes it harder to sell for a while until you rebuild. So we want to help you guys avoid some of those challenges. And let's just jump right in. Eric, I mean, you work with so many of these emerging brands with your mastermind groups and some of the forums, your Facebook groups that you run. What are some of the big ones that you're seeing right now? Challenges that emerging and growing brands are facing today?
Well, so many of them want to grow so fast. Like they see people, brands awarding territories, selling territories, and that seems to be like a badge of honor. We sold 100 territories this year. We have 600 territories sold. And because that is a big number and brands are talking about that all the time. And then so you get a brand that isn't in the broker networks or, like a franchise, FranNet, IFPG, all of those guys, if they're not in there, they see how are these brands selling all of these territories? And so then they look at their own brand and they want to sell more and they think about their own value propositions on why people should buy their brand over a brand that's probably working with an FSO or as part of a family of brands. And so they start to think about things like, well, our value prop is we have bigger territories. Like that's one of the things that when we talk to brands, like what makes you different? You're a me too, which franchising is a lot of me too. Like there's very few like, amazing brands that are just like changing it has not been done before in franchising. Most of them are me too's. And so they think, well, we have larger territories. We have less expensive franchise fees. Those are two things that I hear over and over. And the founders truly believe if they have bigger territories, that's a big value prop for them. And in reality, like they're just hurting themselves. They might be bringing in the wrong franchisees. They're locking up territory because they've sold large territories. Maybe they sold 3 territories that should have been 9 territories. And it does the franchisees a disservice because they're not penetrating the market. And they would probably do better if they had 3 amazing franchisees in 3 kind of different markets that were penetrating that demographic area, that DMA. And there would be more locations, there would be more branding in those particular areas versus just like one guy or gal squatting on a bunch of territory, not doing anything with it. And then the brand gets frustrated because they're not really penetrating the market like the franchisor thought they would. So there's all kinds of things wrong with just thinking you need to have bigger territories. You need to have the right size territories. You need to do things where the franchisee can be successful and penetrate that market. And it's good for future franchisees to go into. Net, franchisors need to see their territory as the gold. Like they're giving up their gold way too soon. They're just like letting franchisees squat on it. And I've been a franchisee before, and I love to buy up bigger areas and get bigger territories and just squat on them. But it's not good for the franchisor. So you need to understand your market, understand how a franchisee can really do a lot of business, a lot of revenue, and make a lot of profit in a particular size territory. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the simplest is probably look at your competitors that are successful, that have happy, successful franchisees. What are their territory size? And figure out why they are the way that they are. Not just think, oh, if ours are bigger, that means they're going to be better.
Yeah, I want to share a thought on this too, because you mentioned 2 things, and I see a lot of emerging brands that do this. Say, well, how can I compete with these other guys who have a foothold? Let's talk about painting, right? There are tons of painting franchises out there. It's hard to say. I do know a few that do it differently, but it's hard to really carve out a niche and say, hey, we're different because in painting, we do residential and commercial. They all are doing residential and commercial now. So we focus on this segment of the market instead of that. Oh, that's a little different, but what I see emerging franchises doing is they try to give bigger territories and they try to have lower fees.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because they don't think about this, but what they're actually doing is they're attracting a lower end buyer. I'm not saying jack your fees to get a better buyer, because then you'll be out of alignment with what's normal. But if your strategy is that I'm going to give up more territory, I'm going to have them pay less, often what you'll find is somebody will come in and maybe buy 2, but they're undercapitalized buyers. So now you've got guys squatting on big territories. And I know 3 brands that have done this. One of them was in Houston. Like, dude, huge freaking market. They had Houston. I was like, Houston, like the whole metroplex.
Oh my God.
And they're like, yeah. And he was kind of an older dude, wasn't making it happen. He squatted on that for like 4 years.
Oh my gosh.
And tied it up. And I won't even say numbers, but I saw his numbers like, dude, I could do that much revenue in like Spanish Fork, Utah. Like, what are you doing in Houston? So he was undercapitalized. and he didn't have the back office support managing a Houston territory. So it's a real disservice, and you've got to look at it from both angles of how much am I locking up this gold? Like, am I protecting this gold in my territory? And if I'm trying to undercut the market price with my franchise fee, you might be attracting a lower end buyer who doesn't have the capital to really expand and blow up that larger territory. It's kind of a two-edged sword, I think.
I was talking to someone at the multi-unit conference, a franchisor, a newer franchisor, has a decent amount of franchisees. And that's when you and I last saw each other.
Yeah.
And he was bragging to me about how low his franchise fees are. And he came from the right place. He had the right heart. He's like, I don't want to overcharge my franchisees. I want them to get into business at a lower price so they can start making money faster and have EBITDA and cash flow and all that. So it came from the right place. But he is probably half of what his competitors are charging for territories. So I flipped it on him. I was like, well, if you were to charge them market rate, what everybody else is charging, what if you took that and invested into them, in a coach, in this thing, in marketing, in that? So like, don't think about it as they're paying that to you and it's just going into some slush fund. Think about them, you charging them market rate, which is more than what you're doing, and wanting to give them an ROI on what they paid or what they invested into that. And he looked at me and he's like, I'd never thought about it that way. And that happens more often than you would think, because franchisors they do so many things wrong, emerging brands, until they have 100 units and like, oh, we made so many mistakes. The problem is a lot of these early brands don't know the mistakes that all these other franchisors made because they don't talk about them very often. But that's one of the mistakes that people make. And then you're getting the wrong franchisee, paying a little bit of money and not making very much money, not being very happy. And then it just continues to go downhill from there. So yeah, I've seen it. And the franchisors just need to kind of start asking the right questions. Why are you charging the franchise fees that you're charging? Like, why do you do that? And even in the Facebook group, Dave, somebody the other day, I talked to, we like to make really big, robust item 19s at Front Street Equity. And there's a number of different reasons for that. One, it helps the candidates really have a better understanding of the financial model, the possibilities. Yeah. It also protects the franchisor. And Lane Fisher Zucker talks about this a lot. He's like, you want item 19s because it helps protect you as the franchisor, as people are going through the franchise development process, discovery process. So we like to have these really big item 19s. And I posted in the group, I'm like, hey, who wants to see a really big item 19? Someone in there says, that's the stupidest idea ever, Eric. You're a complete idiot for even thinking you want big item 19s. And he is a franchisor, new franchisor with 0 franchisees and 0 proof of concept. So he's working on his concept right now, like building something out. So he doesn't really have anything to sell. And yet he's talking about why it's the stupidest idea ever versus asking, why do you want that? And I shut him off right away. I'm like, I'm not going to respond to you if you're just like, Eric, you're an idiot for thinking that. But if he would have said, this is interesting, Eric, I always thought that, you don't want to put too much in item 19 because of this reason, that reason, and the other. What do you know that I don't? Or what do you think that I may not be aware of? But he just, he didn't do that. So he lost out on some education. And whether it would have changed his mind or it's right for him, that's besides the point. Franchisors need to ask better questions when they're in groups of other brands that have much further along than they are.
Yeah, there's this weird dichotomy I find in this industry. I'm still, I don't know, fairly new. I've been here almost 5 years, but in this industry, people will share details.
100%.
It's crazy. Like I was at a table at a conference early, like in my first year here, and there were 2 brands that were technically competitors. Founders were sitting together talking, like, and they didn't care. Like the big dog was sharing with the little dog, hey, this is what we went through. Yeah, I did that exact same thing. And it opened my eyes to the fact that truly, if you're humble enough to ask anybody's going to share. But there's also the other side of it, which is kind of, events and other things. There's a lot of chest beating and, back slapping, and that culture is counterproductive
Yeah.
to the other. And it almost makes people afraid. Look, I'm not there, so I shouldn't ask. But I promise you guys, like, best advice you could get from this whole podcast, it's coming from me, not him, to right now, but ask your peers, ask people who have arrived, even if they're in a similar, especially like home services. There are tons of
Oh,
people,
yeah.
not maybe painting, but roofing or walls or windows or whatever.
Yep.
You can ask them, and they've gone through the same darn thing you have, and they'll share exactly how not to do it. Even if they don't know, they're still figuring out how to do it. Or you can talk to a guy like Eric, who's helped people figure out how to do it 50 times, and then you kind of glean knowledge from him. But that, I didn't see that thread. I would have been all over that, because 100% wrong,
Yep.
100% wrong, and from his perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And then some people are commenting. There's so many crazy comments. When you get into social media, there's so many crazy comments. But you go back to, like, being humble and having that sense of humility and being the better question asker. And I think that's one of my superpowers, is being a straight C student. I think I got 1A in my entire life, and that was in finance, of all things. One of the hardest classes in college I got an A in, but everything else I was pretty much a straight C student, maybe a B here and there. And being from South Dakota, I live in a town of 10,000 people. Like, there's no prestige when I go to a conference and I'm like, hey, I'm from South Dakota. I get like, man, you're the first person I've ever met from South Dakota. And I used to kind of cower and be embarrassed of that. And then I started to embrace it. And like, these people remember, like, I'm the only guy from South Dakota that they met. And they don't have very high expectations from a guy from South Dakota. So I'm okay. And I'll just embrace that and start asking questions and start learning. And in many ways, underestimated. But I always love to be around groups of people that are much more successful than me. For some reason, I've always sought out mentors. I've always sought out people that were way more successful than me, as a father, as a businessman, as a husband. Like, I want to talk to those people that are beyond where I am and learn from them. And it's uncomfortable, because you don't have the answers, and you are around people that have the answers. They are way more successful than you. But I enjoy being uncomfortable these days. Like, it was about 5 years ago when I first started going to masterminds, and I did it to be around people that I wanted to be like. And go figure, a few years later, I'm one of the leaders in these different mastermind groups that I pay to be a part of, or the groups that I was the underdog, or probably the least successful. It helped me get to the point where people were seeking me out. And then I'm like, I'm in the wrong room now. I'm in the top of this room. I need to put myself into a different place, a different conference, a different group of people, where I'm on the bottom again, because you need to do that to get better, to improve, to get to where you want to go. So I'm a huge fan of humbling myself and asking questions and learning.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets rid of the concept of feeling like it's time to beat your chest or pat people on the back, right? It's no, I'm not,
100%.
because there's nowhere to arrive. Like, it's a journey, right? We got to figure out, like, how do I continue on an upward path on this journey, rather, because there's no such thing as plateauing. You're either climbing up or you're sliding back. It's the way it works. Yeah, I love it, man. Well, you mentioned this earlier on, so let's shift gears a little bit. All franchise brands want to grow, especially the growing brands. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and there are a lot of ways that they try to do it that can sometimes be catastrophic for them. And share a little bit of your wisdom on that. Like, what are some of the best ways for emerging and growing brands to grow? What are some of the options? And then let's pick some of those options apart, so people can have some actionable ideas of what would be a good fit for them.
So you need franchisees, like, number one, if you're a franchisor, you need franchisees. And so many brands, founders, they think they've got the greatest thing. They got the greatest product, the greatest concept, and people are just going to buy it. And it's just very unlikely, unless you're Crumble Cookies or Orange Theory. And Orange Theory is not even a good example, because they didn't start out as a rocket ship. Like, they had struggles and different things early on. But Crumble is, people just want to be like them, where they exploded and their franchisees make a bunch of money. But most brands, they need franchisees, but they don't know where to get them. And it's usually about a year into it, they're like, wow, I thought I'd have 10 or 20 franchisees by now, and I have 0, or I have 2, and they're not doing very well, or it's a lot of work. And so at that point, they know that they need help, which is good. That's where they start looking at an FSO or hiring somebody to coach them on franchise development, or they're hiring a really good franchise development person. So all those are kind of options to help with leads that you already have coming in. But then you have to get leads to come in, and and then they might start working with the portals out there online, which are just really tough. And I've there's that's a way to get leads, but that's a hard way. And then there's the franchise brokers, which they think, oh, my competitors have crushed it in the broker network, I think I'll go into the broker network. And they do that. They pay fees, or maybe they're just pay for performance, but they really don't get any traction. And because the truth in the broker networks is you need to have someone selling for you that the brokers already know, like, and trust. That franchise development person is key. So it's brand is key. They need to have, it's even better if you're a Me Too brand and the brokers have already had traction with a certain brand, call it mosquitoes or painting or restoration, whatever it is. Like, it's easy to go behind and be a Me Too in that if you have a killer franchise development person or an FSO that has a really good reputation. All of that costs money. So those are some of the things, like, people get stuck, Dave, because they hire the wrong FSO. There's a difference between, weak, average, and amazing FSOs, and price isn't always the indicator, because some of the weaker ones charge a bunch of money. And there's a number of really good ones out there, by the way. Like, we are not the only great one. I think we're great, but there are other great ones out there. But that's one of the challenges. Like, people just don't know where to go, and they don't have the talent. So it's like putting the cart before the horse. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? And but I think for brands to kind of wrap that up, brands that want to grow and scale rapidly, meaning they build enterprise value in a compressed time frame to have an exit in maybe 3 to 5 years, the broker networks with an FSO is kind of the magic there, but it comes at a cost. And it costs of capital, costs of time that you're putting into it. And then you have to have somebody help and advise you on how to help your franchisees be successful. Because here's the thing, it's easy is kind of you can pay to get into these networks, have an FSO, and they can sell your brand. If you have 0 franchisees, maybe 1 corporate unit, an item 19, you'll be sold out with hundreds of units. You'll not sold out, but you have sold hundreds of units before, you have many open, because there's no validation. So sometimes one of the dirty secrets is it's easy to sell if you don't have validation. And so, that's something that people don't talk about, but it's easy to sell if you don't have validation. And then it's easy to have a train wreck if you've sold a lot and then you have bad validation, and then it goes downhill real fast. And you and I've seen that happen before. And that's the train wreck that people talk about.
Yeah. And you don't want to be the next, well, I won't say any names, it's not nice, but you want to be the next fill in the blank brand that everybody knows was a rocket ship and then disappeared overnight, or backslid to the point where they were in obscurity for 5 years, rebuilding their item 19 and reputation. Right. It's not a short.
And I'll say
Go ahead.
that there are FSOs that have blown up brands in a good way and a bad way. So it's not, you just can't blame the FSO for that. Like, there have been founders that have made an absolute killing because they were able to put the infrastructure in place where the FSO did their job of selling a bunch of franchises. That's their job. Right. But what we like at Front Street, and there's other groups that do it too, but at Front Street, we like to have compensation on the back end too, whether it's warrants or some type of other compensation that's based on franchisee health. So we spend time helping them, advising on the right the CEO or CFO or CMO or COO or a direct. We usually start them out with certain directors because they don't need a C-level executive as they're starting out, but fractional directors in there that can help them put the things in place to set up the franchisees for success. Like, starting with a really robust learning management system from day one versus waiting until you have 50 franchisees that are about to open and then starting to work on those types of things. So, like, we love to be tied in where our success of placing franchisees is also tied in from a compensation standpoint of the franchisees being successful themselves.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you for a second about that topic, because if you're listening, you're saying, well, how do I know who is a good fit for me and who's not? Eric's talked through two things I think you should be paying attention to. One is their compensation model and their goals, right? Their compensation model is tied to your long-term success, not just I sold a franchise unit, give me a bunch of money, right? And most of them are going to charge something to get set up. That's not abnormal, so don't freak out about that. But what you got to pay attention to is, do they actually care how successful you are after they've sold that unit, or is that unit sell just a paycheck for them and they're on to the next thing and good luck, hope it goes well? Like, there's a psychology difference and a partnership difference. Again, it's truly a partner mindset, and that's what I think you should be paying attention to. Eric just described a way you can see if they have a partner mindset. Do they have a compensation model that's tied to unit success? That's a really interesting thing to look at.
We talk about alignment a lot, and that's why we structure our contracts the way that we do, because we want alignment on franchisee success.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just our business model. A lot of different people have different business models, different way, but like, we want alignment on franchisee success because we saw that as a gap in the marketplace. Again, that's not unique to us. There's other people that do it because there's so many great different groups and businesses in franchising. But we want alignment with our partners that are at Front Street Equity, and then with the brands, our portfolio brands at Front Street Equity. We want like true long-term alignment, and usually like they want an exit at some point, and they don't want to wait 20 years for an exit. And so we're just fully aligned. Like, if they didn't want an exit, we probably wouldn't have them some type of exit. It might be capital injection, it might be selling part of the business, and it might be selling everything, but like, they want an exit at some point, and that's when we want to get involved so we can set them up for that type of success.
Yeah. And in fact, before let's jump into that topic in just a second. Let's finish the thought about FSOs, because I do want to talk about that too. That's important. So units that are trying to build and grow, most of them are looking for some sort of an exit, either an acquisition or at least a partial acquisition to cash out the chips that are on the table. But let's finish a little bit about this. Like,
Let's
FSO,
go deeper, man.
I want to dive deep here, because a lot of guys make mistakes here, and they're good and bad actors in this space. So we talked about alignment, partnership. What are they looking for? A lot up front and a lot when they sell. What are some other things that an emerging brand should be paying attention to as they're interviewing multiple FSOs to try to figure out who's the right fit to help them
I
sell?
would look at their track record, like their true track record. A lot of people will have brands on their website that are their success stories, but they may have had very little to do with the success of that particular brand. So you want to look at that, like, dive deeper, do some due diligence. Did they really have an impact on that brand or not? So I think you want to listen to the words that they use. Like, are they talking about alignment? Are they talking about just awarding territories, selling territories? And are they asking you questions about, like, how are you set up? What kind of learning management system do you have? How are you able to support franchisees? Also, like, one of the biggest things that we look for, true unit economics. Like, we dive deep into their financials, because if they don't have a real successful, studio or retail or business, like, if they don't have certain margins, if they don't have things that we think are replicatable across different markets, like, it's a pass for us. So I would start asking them, like, why do you like us? What do you see in our brand? So you can start to understand if they want just to get a deal done and they know they can sell territories, or is there something really unique? Do they like you as the founder? Do they like you as what is it about you that FSO is really interested in? And I would talk to multiple FSOs as well to start to understand the differences and understand what they're really good at. So some of them are really good at food. Like, food's not our thing. Like, and we'll be super clear about that. Food's not our thing. We're not into fitness. That's not our thing right now. So we're into other things. So you start to look at what they've had success with and ask them why they've had success with different things. Like we know our lane. We'll do some Me Too brands,
Mhm.
but like we want like things that are disruptors. We want things that are changing. It may be a Me Too, but they have something so unique about them. Maybe it's technology that they have a lot of money into, and it's really going to change things. Or they have a unique labor model to this system or this industry that's kind of outdated. So like we like really unique things, and we can put things around that so that can grow and scale rapidly. Here's the other thing too. I know I'm kind of spitballing some things.
Right.
Just because you have an FSO that has an amazing reputation, they have the track record of success and this amazing history. Who is the person that is going to be working your leads?
Yes.
Because you can be a part of like the number one FSO ever, and if you get their B team or their C team, that's who you're dealing with. So you need to understand that. You need to understand if they're how much they really help. Like when we talk about strategic advisory deep in the trenches, ask them how much they help. And you may or may not need that. So you need to make like that's why Front Street's not for everybody. People might not need what we're going to offer. So you
Right.
just really need to ask those types of questions.
Yeah, well, and I want to go back to a couple of things you've mentioned here. Let's start with the last one because you're right. When you're working with an FSO as a founder, their A plus team, their founder group, their senior execs, that's who you're interfacing with, right? They're all, generally speaking, pretty amazing, pretty talented, pretty successful people. They built an organization underneath them, and if they say, "Hey, you're going to fit into our organization and work with this is your team over here," make sure before you're putting ink on paper, like you got to get to know that team that you'll actually be working with, that will actually be repping your brand, actually doing your friend dev marketing, actually closing deals. Because there are layers. It's a parfait, and you want to make sure you're working with the right team. And if that team isn't the right fit for you, that doesn't mean the FSO is the wrong fit for you. But you
Yep.
might want to make sure that you get put with another team, or you evaluate a couple of different teams and pick the one you work with. If they won't allow that and you don't like the team they want to put you on, or they're not willing to introduce you to the team before you sign the deal, a couple of red flags. I'd be pushing back on that concept. Make sure you're talking to a couple of them, right? Because there are good ones and there are not so good ones, but they're all good at one thing. They're all good at selling their services, right? Every salesperson on the planet might, whether or not they can hit their number, they're excellent at selling how good of a salesperson they are.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
it's the same thing. So these are the cream of the crop of people who've sold franchises before, now selling you on using them. It's no to be expected. They're going to be rock stars. And
Look at
then
that contract as well, because like we like performance. Like we want to perform. If we're not performing, living up to what we think we can do, then we want you to be able to fire us and get out of that contract. And I've seen some contracts out there, and they're not from well-known ones. They're from some that are not well-known. And it's like, holy cow, these brands are locked in and they're paying high fees and they're not paying for performance. So we love like performance based. Like if we're not performing, if we're not hitting these benchmarks, if we're not doing what we say we're going to do, then you should be able to get rid of us. But I see some other ones out there that they promise the world and they don't deliver, and yet they're still getting big retainers and things like that. And so that's another thing just to be aware of. Like if that's the thing that you want to do, then that's okay, but be aware of that before you sign.
oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, you wouldn't sign any other contract, right? You wouldn't sign a manufacturing contract without looking at these things. But sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you get so excited, and it's such an emotional buy at that
Yep.
point that you're like, yeah, good enough, good enough. We'll never have a problem. That's fine. I don't need to fire you. Like it always feels that way, right?
Yep.
It's like a prenup. Although I didn't sign one, and just
I didn't either.
the
I
20
didn't
year
have
mark.
anything though when I
I
got
know.
married.
Yeah,
I didn't have much.
I didn't even own a car when I got married. Like my son's like, really? Looked at me like I was some failure. I'm like, really? You think I'm a failure? He's like, no, not really. But it's funny, like the expectations we have going into that stuff. We've riffed on FSOs for quite a while, but that's not the only option, right? There are other options that might be better for some of these emerging brands. Sometimes growing too fast, FSOs, a lot of them will blow you up. You'll go
Yep.
from 5 to 50 units in a year. if you don't have the right infrastructure in place before you sign with that FSO and have a plan to build the infrastructure to support it, you're going to be in trouble. Do you have some insight you'd share on that,
I
Eric?
think there's growing pains. Like anything, there's growing pains, regardless. Even if you have a track record of success in a previous brand, and there's a number of different brands out there that have had a founder that has had a tremendous track record. They go on to start another one, a good
Mhm.
track record, and so on and so forth. But I would not place more confidence on that founder with brand number two or brand, maybe a little bit, but brand number two or brand number three, that they start just because they have a big track record of success. And there's different families of brands, and just because one of them is crushing it doesn't mean brand number two and brand number three and brand number 4 or 10 or 12 is going to do the same.
Yeah.
I know franchisees that have big money behind them that are part of families of brands, and there's multiple different ones out there. So if anyone thinks they know what I'm talking about, they probably don't, because it's multiple different ones, and they've got big money behind them, and they're going deep into one or two brands with a particular family of brands, and then they're going out and they're getting involved with different groups, different
Mhm.
brands that are outside of that, and so the point is, just because if this is for franchisees that are looking at buying, just because someone has success doesn't mean brand number 2 or 3 or 4 is going to be repeating that same type of success. And I see that a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good advice. Let's talk about in-house, right? Because if you're not going to go hire an FSO, but you want to grow, other options are I can do it myself as the founder CEO. Who better to sell this, right? Or I can hire somebody. If I hire somebody, can I afford to hire that rock star friend dev guy, or should I hire a rookie and try to train him up? Should I use my cousin Vinny? Like, it's kind of
It's
all.
so hard. It's so hard because founders need to be doing founder things, but good friend dev people need to, and they're sales guys. They're going to eat what they kill. And if you
Mhm.
don't have enough for them, they're not going to stick around, because they shouldn't stick around, because they need leads. They need to close deals, and they need, and so if you don't have the leads, you probably should be doing it yourself, or
Mhm.
maybe you're training up somebody. They need coach though. And this is one of the things that we do in my mastermind is we help some of these Fran dev people, coach them along to make them not horrible, because some of them, they've never done it before. They think because they come from a pharmaceutical sales background or door to door or you name it sales background that they're going to be able to do franchise development. Well, Fran dev is a high ticket 90-day sales process, and a lot of people aren't used to that. It's a different type of sale than what a lot of people are used to.
Yeah.
So I would say founders should probably have a call setter, somebody setting calls, and maybe have someone, vet these people out before they get to that founder. But then the founder should really, probably be taking these calls and start to work with those leads early on to understand what it's really like. And if the founder can't sell them, it's going to be hard for anybody else to sell them. And then you can pay for kind of fractional friend dev people, and they're out there. I was just talking to somebody in my mastermind. He's a franchisor, and he's looking at hiring kind of a fractional friend dev person, and they're out there, and that's
Yeah.
another option. And this particular person, they love to work not broker leads. They love to work kind of the portal leads. So they'll
Mhm.
take garbage leads and just pound through phone calls and emails and whatnot. So I think that's the other thing. If you can take the good leads yourself as a founder, and then you have to have a good process. And so many founders don't have a good process, Dave. And I have a free kind of training that I give people, and maybe we can send put a link on that, but it's just a free like 90, 120-minute training that gives people kind of the foundations of how to sell franchises. But they need to get trained on how to do this, because most founders are doing it wrong, and they think they're doing the right thing and they're actually doing the wrong thing, like so
Yeah.
many founders do. So
Yeah.
to wrap that up, founders probably should be selling themselves, because who better to sell than the founder, especially when you don't have a lot of lead flow. And then bring on probably a fractional person that has experience in franchise development. And they're not going to be a rock star. If they're doing that, they're probably not going to be a rock star, because they need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year if they're any good as a franchise development person.
Mhm. Yeah. And just I want to share a thought on that. You mentioned it before. As there's kind of this inflection point where, as the founder, you now need to focus your attention over on operations and building the support systems to make your franchisees successful, because ultimately you need to be royalty independent, right? That's
Yep.
the name of the game. And that doesn't happen unless they're successful. But in the early stages with low volumes of leads,
Yep.
you should be able to do Fran Dev, and you should be going through the trenches on that process so you understand it. So you're in touch with it when you start to outsource it. There's this inflection point where you get enough leads in that you can't keep up. You need to have good systems in place, but it's also a good time to get a setter, somebody
Yep.
who. But just a word of warning on setters, and this is Dan Clapp and I talked about this for a while. Like, you don't hire Jimmy for a summer job just out of high school to be your setter, because if you got legitimate buyers, imagine if you were, I'm a middle-aged guy and I want to buy a franchise. Let's say I've got 1.2 sitting in the bank or in the marketplace I can roll into with a 401k rollover. I'm a pretty sophisticated buyer, and if I talk to some snot-nosed kid who
Yep.
knows nothing, who's trying to pre-qualify me, I'll instantly be turned off. So you want to get a setter that's got at least an air of sophistication, isn't super young and comes across that way, but they can handle volumes of lead and pre-qualification screenings and then setting appointments. That minutia can kill a founder. I've
A
seen people
hundred
do
percent.
it all, and
A
and
hundred
they're
percent. Even just having, a the right questions on the qualification form. Are they ready to buy in the next 3 months? Do they have $100,000 liquid? Are they, are you looking at other brands? So you just ask, 3 to 5 good questions to understand if they're qualified,
Mhm.
and then take that call, or you can even text them or message them to kind of pre-qualify them a little bit more. I deal with a lot of buyers. People come into the Facebook group and they are buyers, and I vet my virtual assistants vet them out, and then we will direct them different ways,
Mhm.
because we refer them out to different people. But you can do a lot of this on text where you don't have to even talk to them, vet them out, text messages, instant message, wherever that lead's coming from. And that's a really good way to do it as well.
Yeah, that's smart. Well, we've got just a moment to wrap up. So, Eric, let's talk for a moment about. I put it off, but actually, why don't we just ask you for some parting thoughts? Like, just wrapping up what we talked about today. We kind of spanned FSOs. We talked about franchise sales processes, setting up the right equation for success and support. What are some things you would add on to that and wrap up with today?
I think there's so much research you can do, through podcasting, through YouTube videos.
Mhm.
Like if you're looking at a particular FSO or salesperson or whatever, or vendor, go find them online, listen to how they do interviews, what they say. You can learn so much. I just had somebody on my podcast that owns 2 different brands. And Dave, he said, Eric, I've learned everything because I've listened to every single one of your podcasts. And then I would hear something and I would go find that vendor. He said, I heard Jamie Weeks with Orange Theory talk about Ceteris, the bookkeeping. He's like, then I went and found them. I heard somebody talk about this. I went and did that. So if you're vetting people out, one of the easiest ways is to go find them online and listen to them on YouTube, listen to them on podcasts, because you can really get to know people that way and you can learn a lot. So that's the free way to learn. And then I would also say hit up some of these industry events, because people like you, people like me go to these events. And when I was at multi-unit, when I was at IFA, I didn't go to any of the meetings, 0 meetings. I was talking to people the whole time. And because it's a fun thing to do. And that's where you can talk to people, you can talk to experts, you can talk to people that you normally would not be able to have a phone call with. And so I would definitely hit up some of those industry events like what I just described, or anything that Lane Fish and Brad Fishman do with, Springboard and
Yeah.
whatnot. So
Mhm.
that's my parting advice.
Yeah, thanks. No, guys, from a man who knows what's going on in the franchise industry, I've learned a lot from Eric. I've listened to quite a few of his podcasts, and there's a lot of content out there. You really very quickly you'll start to identify there are a lot of people who are just putting out content because they want to get their face in front of everyone. There are also people that are trying to put together high quality content that's educational and actionable. So you'll see that pretty quick, but listen to as much as you can. I've had
Yeah.
several people reach out to me and say, "Hey, I need an introduction to this guy." In fact, I've had 2 people in the last like month who said, "Hey, I need to meet this person. Would you do an intro for me,
Yep.
Dave?" And I didn't even know they were listening to the podcast, but that's a good sign. It's a good sign. But look for people who are providing real value. That's my advice in general. And when it comes to this, be thorough. Don't make an emotional short-term buy when you're looking at FSOs versus going to a broker network. If you're going to go to a broker network, listen to the podcast that Eric and I recorded like a year and a half, 2 years ago about how to work a broker network to make sure you're getting the best ROI out of it. Because there are lots of people I hear that sign up, they pay good money, and then they're like, well, nothing happened. I was like, well, what did you do? Like, well, I went to the events. Like, well, what did you do? You can't just show up and expect money to flow. And so there's a lot of work that has to go into it. But guys, good luck. Eric, thanks so much for being on here and sharing all this insight with us. You're great. And guys, check out Franchise Secrets. That's your podcast, right?
Yep.
Good content there. And then there's some Facebook groups and some other things Eric does. Look him up on LinkedIn. What's the best way for them to find you? Just LinkedIn and then connect?
Yeah, LinkedIn. It's Eric Van Her, ERIK. Go to Scalable Franchise, and I've got a lot of links off of there. Go to Front Street EP, like Front Street Equity Partners, and you can find some stuff there. But yeah, that Facebook group is fun. Check out that Facebook group, franchisesecretsgroup.com, and that will put you into that Facebook group. And that's a good place to learn as well. Dave, it's always fun to hang out with you, man. It's so good seeing you the other day. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks again, Eric.